Pentagon spends billions of dollars every year to assist foreign militaries around the world. The rapid collapse of the Afghan security forces is typical for local forces built with U.S. military assistance. That's according to Rachel Tecott. She's an assistant professor at the U.S. Naval War College. She's writing about building allied armies in Foreign Affairs magazine. Rachel, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Why does the Defense Department engage in what's called security force assistance or train and equip operations?
Well, it's an attractive tool for the U.S. Defense Department because if there's a threat far away that the U.S. doesn't want to send its own troops or it doesn't want to send its own troops to manage, it sounds like an economical tool to build the capacity of local partners to bear that burden for it so the United States doesn't have to bear the burden. So build the capacity of local partners, work by, with, and through those local partners, and that's a good way to manage a threat that's far from the United States without sinking a lot of American resources into the project. That's the idea behind this.
It's a good idea, but why wasn't the military successful then in building a capable army in Afghanistan to fight the Taliban?
Yeah, I mean, the tricky part of this problem is that military effectiveness or the capacity of the partner to manage a local threat doesn't just depend on how much cash that local partner has, how much cash the United States gives it, the equipment the U.S. gives it. What matters is the decisions that the local partners make. So how to employ those resources, whether to promote internally based on merit, whether to root out corruption. These are the patterns of decisions that make or break the capacity of a partner. So it doesn't matter how much cash or equipment the U.S. puts into a partner military if the leaders at the top continue to make decisions that undermine the military. And so while the U.S. military is very good at providing training and equipment, it's not so good at convincing the local partner to make the decisions necessary to make those resources translate into military effectiveness. That's the key challenge for security force assistance.
Well, speaking of those foreign leaders, you say this in your article, quote, Afghan officers proved less interested in fighting for the corrupt government in Kabul than in securing their own personal enrichment, siphoning American dollars to their patronage networks. Did Pentagon leaders know that that was happening?
Yes, they did. This was not a surprise to anyone who was paying attention to this problem. So the U.S. had military advisors embedded within Afghan units down to the battalion level for the duration of the advisory project in Afghanistan. And there were consistent lamentations. American dollars are being siphoned off. We are fueling corruption. It was not a surprise to anyone paying attention to this project or anyone involved in it. The key problem was, well, how do we get them to stop doing this? And that's where the issue was. It wasn't blindness to the problem, it was steps to fix it.
So then, Rachel, why didn't they just say, okay, the money's going to stop until you cut out the corruption and stealing our money?
That is such a great question. It's the question that got me interested in this project. Why not make all of the assistance conditional on the partner actually employing it to accomplish the mission the money is for? And that's a tricky question. And from the U.S. military's perspective, and it is the U.S. military, Washington delegates security force assistance projects almost entirely to the U.S. military. Conditionality has come to take kind of an ideological counter-normative tenor in the U.S. military. It's considered bullying, coercion. That's not what we do with our partners. We don't force them to follow our advice. We are here as advisors, here to help. It's not up to us to make their decisions for them. And that's sort of a mantra in U.S. military advising, that we're here to help, not to bully, which is interesting to me because conditionality is a very normal part of alliance and partnership dynamics in almost every other context. But exclusively in this context of military advising, the military's come to view that as a taboo. Conditionality is a taboo. And I think that's largely because the military is a bureaucracy, and like many bureaucracies, once it sets up really tricky mechanics, and advising is nothing if not very tricky mechanics. Get your people into theater, provide training, get equipment there. Once they set all of that up, they want to keep it running. It's disruptive to stop it. So to threaten to stop it, to threaten to say, you know, if they don't use it well, we're going to cut these trains off. Well, that's threatening to disrupt their own heavy machinery, and that's never something that the U.S. military is inclined to do unless pushed to do it from the outside.
And do you think that the outcome in Afghanistan was a foregone conclusion, given that it did not have the You know, it was essentially a failed state. It did not have all those controls that you would need to have a successful army.
I think it's a tricky question. Where I come down right now is it's not possible to build strong national armies in places like Afghanistan. And that's because militaries are state institutions. And so if there's a country that doesn't have strong state institutions, building a military is essentially building a state. And that's a very difficult thing for the US government as a whole to do. And it's a very difficult thing for the US military to do on its own. That said, that doesn't mean that there isn't any role for security force assistance in places like Afghanistan. The US military does have a better record building special units, elite forces on a much smaller scale. But that's a much different proposition and a much less ambitious project than building an entire national military. And I'd also add, if the US is going to engage in any kind of security force assistance, it's a foregone conclusion that it will fail if the US military relies exclusively on personal diplomacy, on building rapport with the partner leader as its primary strategy of influence. Incentives are a very important part of this project.
Well, Rachel, thanks so much. Very interesting article. Thanks for being on the program.